They didn't lose everything. They didn't hit rock bottom. They didn't have some dramatic breakdown anyone could point to and say, that's what broke them. And yet somehow they seem sadder than almost anyone you know. The people who live the smallest lives, small towns, small circles, small routines, often report a quiet, low-grade heaviness in study after study. Not depression exactly, not crisis, just a dull, persistent weight that never quite lifts and never quite explains itself. Meanwhile, the people chasing bigger, faster, more, the ones building something, moving cities, meeting new people, taking risks that terrify them, often report something closer to genuine aliveness, not constant happiness, but a kind of forward motion that small lives rarely produce. That should not make sense. Smaller usually sounds safer, quieter usually sounds calmer, and yet it doesn't hold up. And once you understand why, you may never look at staying small the same way again. Stay till the end, because this isn't a video telling you to abandon your hometown or burn your comfortable life down tomorrow. It's a video explaining something psychology has known for decades, but almost nobody talks about clearly because it's uncomfortable. It suggests that the very things we call peaceful, routine, familiarity, closeness, might sometimes be the exact things keeping people stuck in a version of themselves they never actually chose. Let's start with a concept that changes everything. It's called hedonic stagnation. Here's how it works. Humans have a remarkable, almost desperate need for novelty. New experiences release dopamine, not just as pleasure, but as a signal that says, you're growing, you're becoming someone, your life is still moving somewhere. When that novelty disappears almost entirely, when every day looks structurally identical to the one before it, the brain doesn't relax into contentment the way we assume it would. It starts quietly starving. The days blur together. Monday feels like Thursday. This year feels like last year. Nothing marks time anymore because nothing is actually changing. And without you noticing, a dull ache sets in, not sharp enough to call a crisis, not dramatic enough to justify complaining about, just constant enough to eventually call it normal. People in this state rarely say, I'm sad. They say, I'm just tired. Or, I don't know, I just feel a bit stuck lately. That vagueness is the tell. Real crises have names. Quiet stagnation doesn't, because nothing technically went wrong. This isn't a personal failure. It's built into the architecture of the human brain. We are wired for growth, not repetition. Every major theory of human motivation, from Maslow's hierarchy to modern self-determination theory, points to the same underlying truth. Humans don't just need safety and comfort. We need a sense of becoming, which means the smaller your world stays, the more your brain quietly starts asking a question it never gets answered. Is this all there is? Now, here's where it gets interesting. People who live small lives often, without realizing it, walk straight into this trap. Not because they're weak, not because they lack drive, but because their daily existence is built around a fundamentally different psychological structure, one that research keeps showing produces more stagnation and quiet despair than constant, chosen change ever does. Let's talk about the first reason, the missing choice. There's a well-known study in behavioral psychology involving jam samples. Researchers set up a table offering 6 flavors and another offering 24. Common sense says more options should mean more sales. The opposite happened. Fewer options sold significantly more jars. Too much choice created anxiety instead of satisfaction. That study gets quoted constantly to argue that small lives with fewer choices must therefore be more peaceful. But there's a flaw in stretching that conclusion too far. The JAM study measured people choosing between good options they were free to walk away from. It said nothing about what happens when choice isn't limited by preference, but by circumstance. When the job that was ever realistically on the table was the one job, when the partner options in your social radius numbered in the single digits, not because you filtered them out, but because that's simply who was around. That's not the elegant simplicity of 6 jam flavors instead of 24. That's having one flavor and being told to be grateful there was jam at all. People living small lives often have the same restaurant, the same handful of paths that were ever available, the same short list of what life could have looked like. And when doors close early, not by choice but by circumstance, something in the mind quietly gives up asking, what if? Contentment can come from closing doors on purpose, but when every door was closed for you before you ever got to choose, that's not peace. That's a life you never got to try on in the first place. Now let's talk about the second reason, claustrophobic comparison. Human happiness has never been measured in absolute terms. It's almost entirely relative. Psychologists call this social comparison theory, and in a small circle, that comparison doesn't disappear the way people assume. It just gets suffocating in a different way. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone remembers who you were at 17. There's no anonymity to reinvent yourself in, no fresh room to walk into as someone new. A person struggling in a small town isn't just struggling privately. They're struggling in front of the same 12 people who've watched them struggle for 20 years, with nowhere to disappear to and quietly start over. Every mistake has witnesses who never forget. Every setback becomes part of the town's memory of you, whether you want it there or not. The bigger your world gets, the more places exist where nobody knows your worst chapter yet. A new city means a blank page. A new social circle means nobody's first association with you is the thing you're most ashamed of. People who live smaller lives are often unintentionally trapped inside a single unmoving audience, and a fixed audience with a long memory makes it dramatically harder to feel like you're allowed to change. Because in their eyes, you already are who you've always been, and no amount of internal growth updates that external verdict. Now, let's talk about the third reason, and this one might be the most important. Depth without room to grow. Small lives tend to produce deep, long relationships, the same people, decade after decade. That sounds beautiful on paper, and often is. But research on identity and social role theory shows something uncomfortable underneath it. Relationships that never refresh, that never meet a new version of you, can quietly calcify into roles you never explicitly agreed to keep performing. The friend who's always been the funny one, even on the days he isn't. The daughter who's always been the responsible one, even when she's exhausted and needs someone else to hold things together for once. The neighbor who's always been the quiet one, so nobody ever asks what she actually thinks. Depth, without any new relationships to test a new version of yourself against, can slowly turn into a script everyone around you has memorized and expects you to keep reading from, whether it still fits or not. Big, expanding lives constantly introduce people who only ever know your present self, not your history. That's not shallow. That's freedom. It's the chance to become someone new without anyone in the room correcting you back into your old role. A small life, by its very structure, tends to protect the old version of you, simply because there's nowhere else for a new version to be witnessed, believed, or reinforced. Let's talk about the fourth reason, understimulation and the flatline nervous system. This one is more physiological than psychological, but it matters just as much. The human nervous system doesn't only crave safety, it also craves enough activation to register as being alive. A life with too much sameness, too much predictability, too little novelty can push the nervous system into a state that looks calm from the outside but feels internally like a slow flatline. Small repetitive lives, without any real counterbalance, can leave the body understimulated for years at a time. And it turns out a huge portion of what we experience as quiet sadness isn't a thought at all. It's a physiological state. A dulled nervous system doesn't produce peace. It produces apathy. And apathy is easy to mistake for contentment, right up until you realize you genuinely can't remember the last time you felt something sharp enough to call alive. Now let's talk about a fifth reason, one that rarely gets discussed, narrative starvation. Human beings don't just live day to day. We construct our lives as a story, and stories require movement. A beginning, complications, turning points, growth. Psychologists who study narrative identity have found that people who can point to distinct chapters in their life, moves, changes, reinventions, tend to report a stronger sense of meaning than people whose life reads as one long, uninterrupted paragraph. Small lives, when unchosen, often produce exactly that. One long paragraph. Same house, same job, same weekend routine for 20 years, with no clear chapter breaks to look back on. When someone eventually asks, "So what's your story?" there's a quiet panic, not because nothing happened, but because nothing changed. And a life with no chapters can start to feel less like a life and more like a waiting room. Now, I want to pause here and address something important. This isn't an argument against small towns, or slow living, or simple routines. Plenty of people build small, quiet lives and are genuinely, deeply happy inside them. This isn't about size being inherently good or bad. It's about understanding what a small life can quietly cost you psychologically when it was never actually chosen, only inherited, and making sure you're not confusing comfort with contentment. Because here's the quiet lie so many people are living inside without knowing it. We've been taught that staying small keeps us safe, and safety equals peace. But research keeps showing those two things aren't actually the same equation. Unchosen smallness often creates more stagnation, more suffocating comparison, more calcified identity, more nervous system numbness, and a story with no chapters to look back on. And all five of those things are proven direct opponents of genuine aliveness. So what does this actually mean for you? It doesn't mean uproot your entire life tomorrow. It means becoming honest about which parts of your small, peaceful life are genuinely serving you, and which parts are simply the only life that was ever handed to you, one you never actually sat down and chose. It means asking whether your circle of 5 people lets you grow, or quietly keeps you the same person you were at 17. It means noticing whether your calm is real regulation or a nervous system that's simply gone quiet from underuse. It means asking whether your life, if you told it as a story, would have any chapters at all. It means recognizing that opening a door on purpose, one new city, one new circle, one uncomfortable new version of yourself, isn't betrayal of where you came from. It's often the exact condition growth requires in order to exist at all. The saddest people aren't small because smallness is inherently sad. Many of them never got the chance to choose otherwise. They're sad because they built, or inherited, a life with fewer real choices, a comparison pool with nowhere to hide and grow, relationships that froze them in an old identity, a nervous system so understimulated it forgot what feeling alive was supposed to feel like, and a story with no visible chapters to prove that time had actually moved. Not sad because less is inherently worse, sad because the smallness was never a decision. Small towns, small circles, and small routines often accidentally trap the very growth, reinvention, and quiet spark that only comes from choosing, on purpose, to become someone new instead of quietly, permanently staying who you already were.